The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. As Jesus was walking along, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax collection station. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he got up and followed him. And as he sat at dinner in the house, many tax collectors and sinners came and were sitting with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with the tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard this, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." While he was saying these things to them, suddenly a leader came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples. Then suddenly a woman who had been suffering from a flow of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak. For she was saying to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be made well." Jesus turned and seeing her said, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well." And the woman was made well from that moment. When Jesus came to the leader's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, "Go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl got up. And the report of this spread through all of that district. The gospel of the Lord. All right, there is one phrase that I kind of emphasized that I want to look at again, verse 13. We were reading Matthew 9, verses 9 through 13, and then 18 through 26. In verse 13, Jesus tells the religious leaders, "Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice." Then he goes on to say, "For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Well, what's he making a reference to? Well, there's a couple of things. There is a passage in Hosea, which was our uh, Old Testament reading, our Hebrew Bible reading this morning. Also in Micah, and Amos makes allusion to it also. So I want to go back and read the Hosea passage, Hosea chapter 5, verses 15 through chapter 6, verse 6. "I will return again to my place until they acknowledge their guilt and seek my face. In their distress, they will beg my favor. Come and let us return to the Lord, for it is he who is torn, and he will heal us. He has struck down, and he will bind us up. After 2 days, he will revive us. On the third day, he will raise us up that we may live before him. Let us know, let us press on to know the Lord. His appearing is as sure as the dawn. He will come to us, pardon me, like the showers, like the spring rains that water the earth. What shall I do with you, O Ephraim? What shall I do with you, O Judah? Your love is like a morning cloud, like the dew that goes away early. Therefore, I have hewn them by the prophets. I have killed them by the words of my mouth, and my judgment goes forth as the light. For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. Wow. Okay. So Hosea and Amos and Micah, all these guys are prophesying around the same time. Hosea is remarkable. You may or may not recall that the story of Hosea is that Hosea had married this woman named Gomer. Don't ever do that. marries a woman named Gomer, and she runs away. And he goes and finds her, and she's apparently in the slave market, and he buys her back. Later, she runs away again, and he goes and finds her and buys her back. Again, she runs away, and he goes about. Of course, this is all a story about. Did this really happen to Hosea? Kind of doubt it. He's using this as an allegory of what God's people do. We run away, and he constantly has to come and bring us back. So this passage in Hosea and the first 6 verses of Hosea chapter 5 and the first 6 verses of chapter 6 is this carefully constructed divine human dialogue in which the Lord's judgment is seen as a withdrawal. He withdraws from them. And what this does is it brings out this rather shallow call for a return. Oh, let us go back and know the Lord. Let us strive to know the Lord. Well, this gets answered by the Lord's exposure of Israel's fleeting loyalty and their sacrificialism, thinking that a sacrifice will take care of everything. Historically, the oracle belongs in the late 8th century BCE, in the time leading up to the Assyrian crisis and the fall of Samaria. That's Samaria, the northern capital, in 722 BCE, when both Israel, who is also called Ephraim, and Judah, the north kingdom and the south kingdom, are facing judgment for frankly, their infidelity to the covenant. And Hosea consistently reads political and military disaster, especially the aggression from Assyria, as God's disciplinary action against a people who were ensnared in idolatry and injustice and in unfaithful alliances. I mean, remember, the king in the north kingdom, King Ahab, had married Jezebel, who was the princess, the daughter of the king of Tyre. And she had brought her worshiping of Baal Melkart into the court of Assyria. Hosea is criticizing all this because in Hosea and Amos also, they are saying, look, you've gone after this and you've left the fidelity to the covenant. Now, chapter 5, verse 15 forms this hinge between a series of judgment oracles and the discussion in the first 6 verses of chapter 6. It closes a section describing the Lord as a lion tearing his prey, and then introduces the Lord's withdrawal, which provokes the people's response in the first 3 verses of 6. And within the book's larger marriage metaphor that I described earlier, this passage that we read functions as a poetic dialogue between the estranged husband, the Lord, and the unfaithful spouse, Israel. The dramatization of both the possibility and the profound problem of return. Most historical critical and form critical work sees this dialogue structure with alternating speakers. That happens a lot. Isaiah did that a good bit as well. So a common division of this is we see in chapter 5, verse 15, the Lord's decision to withdraw until Israel acknowledges guilt. Then in the first 3 verses of chapter 6, Israel's confession, come, let us return. And then 4 through 6, the Lord's evaluation and rejection of Israel's superficial piety, climaxing in verse 6. It's not the prophet's ideal call to repentance, but it's the people's own inadequate response. Hosea is using correct theological vocabulary in the mouth of the people. They're saying all the right things, but they're not understanding how grave their situation really is. And then the alternation of speakers, the Lord, the people, the Lord, the people, underlines this tension. Israel's speech is orthodox in language, but it's defective in its depth. The Lord's reply strips away this pietistic veneer and insists on faithfulness to the covenant rather than these ritual gestures. In chapter 5, verse 15, I will return again to my place until they acknowledge their guilt and seek my face. In their distress, they will earnestly look for me, he says. That image reverses the earlier predator metaphor that we saw in previous chapters. Instead of the Lord as a lion actively tearing at Israel, he now retreats to my place, he says. It's a metaphor for withdrawal of his own protective presence. The effect is it leaves Israel exposed to the consequences of their unfaithfulness. And that temporal guilt is what marks the Lord's purpose. The aim of judgment is to teach them so that they acknowledge their guilt and seek my face, he says. He's not trying to annihilate them. He's just trying to keep open the possibility of renewed relationship. That final clause there in that passage, in their distress, they will earnestly seek me. That's kind of anticipating a crisis in which Israel, stripped of other supports, will come back and turn again to the Lord. This works as Hosea's theological interpretation of the imminent national catastrophe, a military invasion from the Assyrians, and the collapse of the North Kingdom. That's the form that the Lord's withdrawal is going to take. This is what the results of that is going to be. And when the people call for the return in the first 3 verses of chapter 6, come, let us return to the Lord, for he has torn us that he may heal us, that he, all that. He's done this, but then he'll fix it. That plural, it's called a cohortative. Let us return. It's representing communal speech. Probably a liturgical sounding summons on the people's lips rather than the prophet's own voice. He's basically saying, this is what they sound like. No, the community rightly recognizes that the Lord is both the source of their affliction, he has torn, he has struck down, but also their only hope of restoration, that he may heal us, that he will bind us up. Reflecting this theology of Hosea, where the same God wounds and heals. What is it that we read in Job? Shall I receive good only from the Lord and not pain also? Sometimes it gets translated as evil, and that's not quite right. Pain. Verse 2, they say, after 2 days, he will revive us. On the third day, he will raise us up that we may live before him. Oh, this such hand-wringing piousness. Of course, a lot of us want to read it as being resurrection-like imagery. But in the context of the Hebrew Bible, this is the language for national restoration after a severe time of judgment, not a literal bodily resurrection. Now, scholars have noted parallels with healing narratives such as Hezekiah's recovery in 2 Kings chapter 20. And that idiom of on the third day, it signals a swift but not necessarily instantaneous recovery. What it's stressing is the Lord's readiness to restore, but only after a divinely determined period of punishment, a timeout, if you will. Verse 3, let us press on to know the Lord. He will come to us as the showers. Okay, it describes the knowledge of the Lord in covenantal terms, using this agricultural storm imagery as the dawn, as the showers, as the spring rains. All that to portray the Lord as a reliable life giver. Ironically, that weather imagery echoes the fertility cult of the Baal cults that Hosea had combated elsewhere. And he's effectively now reclaiming the storm god symbolism for God alone. But the subsequent critique in the last 3 verses, 4 through 6, suggests that the people's appropriation of this imagery masks a persistent syncretism and unfaithfulness. They're trying to have it all. They're wanting to keep the worship of the Lord, of Israel's God, while still giving a nod and a wink to the cults of the Phoenicians. Are those verses authentic repentance? No. They try to make it sound like genuine repentance, at least sounding theologically correct, but it's shallow. There's this confident timetable. We know how religion works. We know how the covenant works. Isn't that the biggest danger about religion is I know how the system works. I know this is the formula that it will take. Always a mistake. After 2 days, on the third day. It's kind of a presumption of the Lord's grace, what Dietrich Bonhoeffer would call cheap grace. As if restoration and healing were predictable, even automatic. People acknowledge that God has torn and will heal, but they don't explicitly confess their specific injustices. And they don't address their idolatry or their breach of the covenant. So the immediate reply in verses 4 through 6 sharply undercuts their speech, focuses on the short-lived nature of their love and the priority of love, steadfast love. The Hebrew word is chesed. Chesed is more important than sacrifice. Remember, that's what Jesus was quoting. It gets translated in the Greek as when the Greek translators in the Septuagint translated it, chesed sometimes loses its steadfast love status and becomes mercy. Well, of course, mercy is included in all that, but it's more than just that. So we can read those first three verses. It's kind of a failed penitential liturgy. They've got the right vocabulary, but they treat repentance as another technique to secure the blessings rather than a radical reorientation toward covenantal loyalty and justice. In verse 4, the Lord laments, "What shall I do with you, O Ephraim? What shall I do with you, O Judah?" Talking to the north kingdom and the south kingdom. Your love is like a morning cloud, like the dew that goes away early. Oh boy. Both kingdoms. Now, Israel's the one under threat, immediate threat from the Assyrians, but he's talking to both the north and the south. That kind of reflects the Hosea traditions that were later to be found in the Judean settings. That kind of universalizes Israel's guilt. It's not just the north kingdom who does it, it's all of us. That metaphor of a morning cloud and dew calls to mind this this weather imagery that Israel used of the Lord, back in verse 3. Now it's turned to expose the fleetingness of Israel's own loyalty, their chesed, which is not at all. It's not steadfast, which is kind of a joke almost to even use the word your chesed, your steadfast love is fleeting. It's not steadfast at all. Therefore, is it even love? Well, it should be. A steady covenant devotion evaporates with the rising of the sun. Then in verse 5, he intensifies this criticism. Therefore, I have hewn them, cut them by the prophets. I have slain them by the words of my mouth, and my judgment goes forth as the light. This prophetic speech is compared to cutting and killing, suggesting that the harsh words of Hosea and other prophets like Amos and Micah are themselves an instrument of divine judgment. They expose Israel's self-deception, and they call them to real change. Real change. That comparison, that simile, as the light, underscores the clarity and the inevitability of this judgment. Like the dawn, it reveals everything, and it can't be stopped. And then verse 6, because I desire chesed, steadfast love, and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. Now that stands within the broader 8th century prophetic critique. Amos, Micah, Hosea, all of them, even Isaiah, the first 39 chapters, all of them attack ritualism when it's separated from justice and loyalty and obedience. You have this comparative, steadfast love, not sacrifice, knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. That's not to say that the Lord abolishes ritual and corporate gatherings and sacrifices, but he radically subordinates it to the covenantal ethics, the relational knowledge. This chesed, this steadfast covenantal love, this relational love, how do we express that? In justice, in mercy, in faithfulness toward both God and neighbor. Knowledge of God isn't just cognition. It's not just, yeah, I know God. I know who that is. Not that. It's something relational. It's this knowledge that shapes our behavior. So then verse 6 of chapter 6 functions as the interpretive key to the whole passage. That the problem we saw in those first verses isn't the absence of ritual or religious language or piousness. What's missing is a transformed life. We know the commandment, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. The way Martin Luther interpreted that is, you shall not take on the name of God and then act like it makes no difference. Well, that's what Hosea is accusing the people of. You don't look like you've changed at all. So the sacrificial rites are a means to an end, not the end themselves. What's the end? Relationship. And any of the idea that the rituals will do the work for us is not a substitute for genuine transformation. We look at that resurrection motif that we find in this passage, especially in verse 2 of chapter 6. After 2 days, on the third day, he will raise us up. Hosea is employing this resurrection language as a metaphor for the restoration. A restoration of a people who have experienced covenantal death in exile and in judgment. And he's implying that that imagery already existed in Israelite thought by his time in the 8th century. We can see this as an early instance of communal resurrection imagery. It's being used rhetorically here to give hope to a community facing death. In Hosea's eyes, because of their unfaithfulness. Sure, it's because of the avarice and the aggression of the Assyrians. But for Hosea, Israel brought it on themselves. We have to be careful about reading that verse about the resurrection as being any kind of Easter prophecy. That's not what Hosea had in mind. The text speaks of healing from severe illness and a national revitalization, not the literal resurrection of a Messiah. Later, Jewish and Christian traditions will understandably hear more in this language than what Hosea intends. But remember, what it means to us or how we interpret it is not what Hosea was talking about. In this time period, in the 8th century BCE, this reflects the theology of their people. God both punishes and heals. National catastrophe is divine discipline designed to bring about repentance, acknowledgement of guilt, and a renewed seeking of God. Now, a quick look. Yeah, I don't know why I lied just then. I'll try to make it quick. In Hosea chapter 6, verse 6, in Amos chapter 5, verse 24, and in Micah chapter 6, verse 8, the idea, they all attack the idea that sacrificial correctness, liturgical correctness, it can't compensate for a life that is absent of justice and mercy and covenantal faithfulness. Okay, Hosea 6:6 says, "For I desire steadfast love, not sacrifice, and knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." Amos 5:24, this is one of the most wonderful, eloquent passages ever. But let justice roll down on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream. All right, he's writing that after rejecting Israel's festivals, after rejecting their offerings and their songs. Micah 6:8, he has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To do justice and to love, chesed, love mercy, love the steadfast love, and to walk humbly with your God. Each of those texts contrasts the rituals of sacrifice, festivals, burnt offerings with a relational, ethical understanding of justice, steadfast love, knowledge of God, and humility. Makes clear that ritual without those things, it's not only insufficient, it's offensive to God. In Amos, he says, I hate your offerings. I despise your holy convocations. Micah 6, verses 6-8, grows directly out of the question, with what shall I come before the Lord? And it lists these increasingly extravagant sacrifices, burnt offerings, thousands of rams, rivers of oil, even the firstborn of our children, before answering with the triad: justice, steadfast love, humility. Amos stacks up the cultic elements, like I said, the festivals, the solemn convocations, the offering, the music, only to reject them out of hand, leading up to the demand for righteousness and justice that rolls down like waters. And then Hosea fits this same pattern by subordinating sacrifice and burnt offerings to love and to the knowledge of God, insisting that covenantal relationship and ethical faithfulness are more central than any of this religious stuff. Micah's call for justice follows from the observation that justice is better than extravagant sacrifice. Amos objects to the disconnect between religious observance and ethical action. And Hosea takes us deeper into the connection between being spiritually grounded and doing good. They all share the 8th century setting, Hosea, Amos, Micah, but they develop their critique in different accents. In all three, the problem isn't worship itself, but it's worship that has been severed from justice, humility, covenantal fidelity. The scathing attack on the sacrificial cult is revealing the need for social justice. I'm not trying to be political, but I'm telling you that the fruit of everything that should be born out of a relationship with God and with each other has to be justice, liberation for everybody. An ethical religion in which work, social life, worship are all integrated. And if people can't please God in their treatment of others, they certainly can't please Him in their offerings. There's a reason that on the holy day of the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, that's the day they go before God and ask for forgiveness and atonement of their sins. But what most of us don't realize is that Erev Yom Kippur, the evening of Yom Kippur, on that day, you ask forgiveness of everyone else. Jesus reflects that when he says, don't come to God with your sacrifice if things are wrong with your neighbor. First, take care of that, then come. The implication is that if we haven't made it right with everybody else, we cannot make it right with God. Words to live by. Thanks be to God. Love to all of you.